There's something I'd like to talk about, some questions that I'd like to bring up, and I'm really grateful because I think that today I can do this without self-righteousness or anger or unforgiveness. What I want to talk about is 9/11. I know it was a long time ago, but I was reading about the collapse of the narrative yesterday, and one of the things that I read is that, you know, obviously, 9/11 was this turning point in our consciousness as a nation, as a people, as a people located on this globe in a general area, right? There was this great offense that happened, right? And when that happened, I was a young man. I was about 27 years old. I was a police officer at the time, actually. I was actually in training. I was at the Cleat County Law Enforcement training facility, and I remember I walked in that morning to the training, and people were gathered around the television, and the buildings were on fire. One of the buildings was on fire. Anyway, everybody has their own story. Like, where were you when? On that one, that's one of those, right? And lots of details. If you remember it, I'm sure you have those details too, but maybe it's time to remember it again now. In peace and love and forgiveness, for myself. Anyway, there was a huge mobilization, obviously, that took place after that, and there was this thing that happened, Jingoism, nationalism. There are different perceptions of what happened. Very quickly, the media began to tell us what probably happened, and very quickly we were asked to make an enemy of the other, and we became really self-righteous, refusing to look at our own part on a global scale. It became us versus them.
Either you're with us, either you love freedom and with nations which embrace freedom, or you're with the enemy. There's no in between. You're either with us or you're with the enemy. That's clear. I will continue to make that clear.
Which is, that's traditional. Right? That's a traditional response to an attack, and it's understandable, considering our state of consciousness. Like, a problem cannot be solved from the same state of consciousness that it was created from, right? So I don't expect that we're, that a problem like that could be solved, from that same state of consciousness. So, I understand. But anyway, there's one peculiar thing that I'd like to remind us of, not for the fact of, or not with the point of becoming angry or disillusioned or anything like that, just for the sake of truth, that there was another building, and it was called Building 7, and Building 7 fell straight down just like the other two buildings fell, as if they had been demolished, intentionally. And we were told that the reason that the two tall buildings fell was because of the airplanes that flew into them, and that somehow it disintegrated their structure so much that they fell straight down like they did, just as if they had been demolished intentionally. But there was a smaller building 7, and we do not remember that building. That building, which also fell straight down, just like the other two did, yet it had not been struck by an airplane. And, I went through this long period of time where I watched the conspiracy videos and blah, blah, blah. And I left all of that behind. I watched a Noam Chomsky video once, and he said basically this. He said, a conspiracy, the larger the conspiracy is, the more people have to be in on it for it to be true, And Uncle Noam kind of talked some sense into me on that one, It's like he helped me to kind of leave behind, what I was grasping to and all of that. Also, I wrote a paper once, and I realized that in order to make a sound argument, that I wasn't going to be able to give myself to that conspiratorial voice, and so it helped me to see it all from a bigger picture. It after all of these years, it still seems clear to me that the government lied to us, right? And that's understandable, right? And we know that's what happens. Governments lie to their people. There's plenty of historical evidence that shows that this is what happens, right? I'm not claiming a huge conspiracy here necessarily, simply because that cannot be proven at this point, right? And I'm not going to dedicate my life to trying to prove some kind of big conspiracy. But I believe I'm coming to the greater point here, is that something wasn't quite right in the story that we were given, right? And there were elements of the story that were ignored, and elements of that story which are still ignored in our deeper collective consciousness, right? And so I think that there's a reason why there are these conspiracy theories, and I think the greater reason behind all of that is we all understand that something's not quite right. Yeah, like the folks who are convinced that COVID-19 is a government conspiracy, right? Or even as extreme as the folks who believe that the world is flat, right? I'm not here to judge any of that right now, and I'm not here to judge myself or anyone who may find some way to disagree with what I'm saying right now. It just seems to me that we all have this awareness of the falseness, right? We have a general kind of aware that something's not quite right, or that we're being lied to, And I think that what we want to do is we want to try to come up with we want to nail down a narrative that proves that we are right, in the sense that we understand that we're being lied to, right? And the folks at Rebel Wisdom have a pretty clear, understanding of what I'm talking about here, and I think listening to them has kind of helped me to even be brave enough to kind of just speak out on this, because I can speak of these things right now without making any grand claims. I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone or anything in particular. Just very generally, I am looking at the idea that we live in a false construct of a world, right? And that there is an understanding of that. And I think it's okay for us to see in generalizations, to understand that, yes, governments do lie to us, and then to accept that, and then to understand that I must forgive that in order to be effective in this world. I can't, for myself, it's not going to help if I get angry and upset about that and start pointing my fingers, because that creates a blindness in me, right? And so I think it's important that we understand that we are in search of a narrative that's more true. And we may be in search of a release from the narrative in general. I think what we may understand from all of this is that it's the narrative that causes us to suffer, right? And we may understand that, that our that the news companies, people who are in charge of filtering current events, there's a benefit for them, or for that corporation, that company, to sell the most dramatic and insane narrative possible, because that's the one that keeps our egos hooked in, right? I think it's really okay to acknowledge that too, right? And all of this for the very simple purpose of helping us to understand the meaninglessness of all of that, right? Because once we understand how meaningless all of that is, and then we forgive that meaninglessness, then we're free to love. And I think that when we're free to love, it's at that point that we're able to be more effective in this world. I think that as we see through the meaninglessness, as we forgive the meaninglessness of it all, we come into this resurrected experience, this state of pure being, this state of I amness, this state of love, the isness, the suchness, the observer. We become more capable of objectivity, right? Not that we can truly ever have a purely objective experience, being subjective being, like from this subjective state. But I think you understand what I'm saying. And I've been encouraged recently by the voice of Daniel Schmachtenberger and others there at Rebel Wisdom, to even just to begin to speak like this, to realize that it is okay for me to look at the world and to see what's happening. And I don't have to be a Daniel Schmachtenberger or a Jamie Wheel, as far as my intellect goes, to be able to look at these things from a very general viewpoint. I don't have to have an encyclopedic mind, right? I don't have to be able to connect all the dots and to be able to describe everything in order to have a legitimate understanding or a valid viewpoint, right? So I can take in information, I can see what's going on, I can even make generalizations. I think a lot of times what happens when we devote ourselves to the details, for some of us, is the devotion to the details promotes an argumentative mind, right? Or an argumentative attitude. It's like we're adding details and information into our brains so that we can make an argument, right? So that we can, and I think there is a legitimate argument to be made. I'm not saying that all arguments are somehow flawed or evil or bad innately, right? I am saying that I think it's important what our intent is as we are gathering information. And I think that what we do with that information is very important also. So I think there is this way that we can look at the world where we don't have to be so detail focused, where we can just see that there is suffering, right? And whatever lies occurred around, the events of 9/11, those are the results of suffering, right? Which have, and suffering causes many other symptoms, right? It comes down to that that basic premise, that all of our suffering is caused by this illusion of separate self, right? That's where all of our problems come from, the illusion of separate self. And I think that it's important that as we see the symptoms of the illusion of separate self out there, that we don't fall prey to that type of thinking in ourselves, right? Because if we are, what we resist persists. So if we are resisting the symptoms of separate self by becoming self-righteous and angry and unforgiving, then we've done an injustice to ourselves and to our brothers and sisters. I think that it's important for us to be able to understand that whenever we see something out there that is unjust, that same injustice can be forgiven in ourselves, that we can truly understand and empathize and have compassion for that suffering, and that we can see it in ourselves, right? And I think that's what we missed on 9/11, right? We were unable to see that we were the cause of that. No matter what the narrative is, whether you believe, just fully that, it was Osama bin Laden and those terrible terrorists that flew the planes into the buildings, or if you just believe that, if you're on the other end of the spectrum and you believe that it was a conspiracy, a United States government conspiracy, and that the United States government actually flew the planes into the towers. Those details, I don't think can be proven, or you could devote your entire life to the proving of those details, but that's already been done. And so the details of the suffering are not so important as understanding that it is suffering that caused that. and my own suffering will not relieve that, right? And if I am pointing fingers at anyone or anything, I am still part of the problem, right? I'm not suggesting that forgiveness means that we take no action in this world or that we never make an argument. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is that we will take more effective and more clear, and we will make more clear arguments once we have a clear heart of forgiveness and love. Does that make sense? So we're all seeing through the illusion, right? We are seeing through that illusion. Now I'm suggesting that we forgive that illusion, understanding that we are creating that illusion, that we have, that our ancestors and us who are all connected, we are the ones who have created this illusion. So if we become angry at the illusion and start trying to resist that illusion without forgiving it, then we only strengthen that illusion. Yes? I mean, this is a mystical ascent. I understand that. But I think that it's the mystical and the rational and the practical are maybe they're not as far separated as we think. And you probably see that if you've listened this far, yes? So anyway, this is really just an effort on my part. This is a prayer. This is me taking a risk, becoming vulnerable, right? Stepping out there and addressing a topic which which can be very tricky to talk about. And I know there are people out there much more equipped intellectually. I know that this idea is already being addressed. On Rebel Wisdom, I really connected with that group of folks there. I don't know too many of them yet, but I really respect their work, and I like the way they're making sense of the world. I like that. They have really inspired me to join this mystical journey that I'm on with the rational that I've already kind of passed through and transcended. And when I say that I've passed through and transcended the rational, I'm not saying that I have climbed to the heights of rational thinking that someone like Daniel Schmachtenberger has, but I'm just saying that I know in my own mind, in my own heart, that I explored the rational at some point to the limits of to its limits in my own being, and so I was able to transcend or to begin to understand the limitations of rational thought, right? And I also see that in the thinkers at Rebel Wisdom. I acknowledge that, and I think that's why I connect with them so deeply, because there's this really powerful connection between what we might call the spirit and what we might call the rational mind. And I think that's what's necessary in order to make peace in this world. And so I really appreciate what's going on there. I appreciate the inspiration. Namaste. The divine in me recognizes and acknowledges the divine in you. God bless you, my friend. You are light. You are love.